So, Nessie does not exist, going deeper than ever before and pushing the scientific boundaries even further. Experts examined millions of samples of DNA from Loch Ness, and the monster they thought is probably an eel. Don't you believe it? The legend of the Loch Ness monster will live on. So why do such tall tales matter? You're watching Roundtable. Hello from me, David Foster. It is not a dinosaur, it is not a shark, not a monster. What is certain is that the legend of Loch Ness has lived on for hundreds of years. It was first mentioned in the 6th century, and it isn't going to die. Call them legends, myths, plain nonsense. We love these tales, and there's a reason why.
Famous in Britain and beyond, the Loch Ness Monster is one of the UK's best-known legends. A mysterious creature said to live in the depths of the loch. Often described as a giant beast with a long neck and one or more humps. But after looking at millions of DNA samples, scientists are offering a different explanation. What people saw was perhaps a giant eel.
There is large amounts of eel DNA in Loch Ness. Eels are very plentiful in the loch system. Every single sampling site that we went to pretty much had eels.
Nessie and other legends like Robin Hood, Bigfoot and King Arthur have been the inspiration for countless books and Hollywood movies over the years. But the lack of evidence didn't stop some people believing. So why do legends matter, and what do they say about us?
Let us get the conversation underway. Of course, behind me we have Nessie. With me in the studio, Dr. Anna Stone, a lecturer in the psychology of beliefs at the University of East London. Mark Norman is here too, folklore author and host of the Folklore podcast. And on the line, Tim Walker, author of the historical series A Light in the Dark Ages. He's written about the legend of King Arthur, so appropriate that we are all on a round table. To them in a moment. But first, let's hear from Scotland. I spoke earlier to Adrian Shine, who's leader of the Loch Ness and Morar project, and I asked him why legends endure.
We don't like to let go of our myths. There is a theory, cognitive dissonance, whereby we hear unwelcome news from the conventional wisdom, like science. And so when we found 25 years ago that there wasn't enough food in Loch Ness to sustain a viable breeding population of large predators, we thought, because we didn't want to let go, we thought of lateral theories, whereby unusual creatures or creatures unusual to Loch Ness might be seen in Loch Ness, irrespective of food resources. So we revised what the expectations might be. Now, the results of the DNA survey found no plesiosaurs. They found no reptiles at all. And so we're left with an interesting conundrum as far as myths go. Do you say Nessie is just a big eel? Or do you say Nessie is a big eel? Because the alternative is that Nessie isn't. And that's unthinkable.
Yeah, you say we need legends because we're human. We have difficulties in understanding the questions that science asks, but with legends, it is simple. You would be destroying some people's beliefs, some people's idea of fun if you said Nessie doesn't exist. But I put this to you. You're also exploiting weaknesses, are you not? In a sense, it is slightly fraudulent. You've made your life, you're living out of this, and a lot of people, a lot of money has come to Loch Ness as a result of it. Is it all harmless?
I think it's harmless. Nessie has contributed to the gaiety of the nations. I think we all agree about that. But you see, it started as rather more than that. After some silliness in the 1930s, some quite respectable British naturalists like Sir Peter Scott and Richard Fitter together with the Member of Parliament, David James, were sufficiently impressed by the overwhelming wealth of human testimony to seeing big creatures in Loch Ness that they set about trying to find out what was going on, and they put cameras around the loch for 10 years. Now, in those 10 years, they failed to repeat the classic pictures. If 1,000 people see a big animal in a lake and you go there and you find the big animal, is it such a big deal? If 1,000 people in a lake see big animals and you go there and they're not there, then that actually becomes rather more interesting. And there are all sorts of ways of pursuing the matter of what the things might be. I've done it biologically, I've done it by engineering, by sonar, by underwater cameras. I even built a submarine once. But in the end, we are left with ourselves and our expectations. And I don't think it is that we are seeing only what we want to see. We are seeing what we are supposed to see. And there are stereotypes which are derived from sea monsters, the sea serpent itself and the plesiosaur, which certain phenomenon on Loch Ness do produce. In other words, the witnesses are honest and sober, by the way, and they are reporting, I think, remarkably accurately what they are seeing. It's just that the interpretation that I might have might be different to theirs.
And the beauty for somebody like you, Adrian Shine, is that Nessie will never die, even if Nessie never lived.
Yeah, the thing about Nessie is that Nessie will be revised. Nessie will move from being the prehistoric monster for which Loch Ness is far too cold, in which there is not enough food for a population of them, in which there was an ice cube until 10,000 years ago. We revise. And that is why these other lateral theories, the catfish, the sturgeon, and the big eel, for which, by the way, we have no evidence, it's just that the DNA cannot dismiss it. We will simply continue to want to do that. Now, there are two ways in which I talked about cognitive dissonance, the sort of bad news that we get and which we resist. Now, I see two ways of evading that. One is by denial. We point to the inefficiency, for example, of the observers with the old Loch Ness investigation. They weren't paying enough attention to the loch. Or we point to the 20% of unreadable DNA in the survey we've just done. But the other route is revision, what I call cognitive revision, where we in fact think of more realistic explanations based upon the input we have from the conventional wisdom, like science.
Well, that was Adrian Shine. Let's bring it back in-house now. And Anna, let me ask you first of all, you are a lecturer in the psychology of beliefs. We want to be convinced, don't we?
We want there to be more to the world than the mundane and prosaic. We love wonders and mysteries, and we like there to be things that we don't quite understand that are out there. We like to think there's more to be discovered in the natural world.
But the clever thing here is, I say we like to be convinced, but we aren't convinced. We know it's not true. So why do we still follow these ideas?
Belief is seldom all or nothing. It's not 0 or 100. We sort of believe things, we partly believe them, we kind of like them to be true, and we sort of know they're not really, but it's not all or nothing.
All a bit childish, isn't it, don't you think, Mark? That we have to believe in things that don't exist when we can see in front of our faces that they aren't there.
I think the world is a difficult enough place as it is, and a bit of escapism surely doesn't do any harm. And we have a propensity for storytelling and for creating myth and story as a species. It's what marks us out from other animals on the earth. So there's no harm in that.
All right, we'll come to some of the favourites that you have in a little while. But Tim, let me come to you. King Arthur's a passion with you. I mean, I know you're a newspaper man. Well, you were in the old days when you had to deal in facts, supposedly. And yet you write that King Arthur was the world's first superhero, or at least Britain's first superhero. Is that what you saw in him?
Well, I sort of stumbled into the Arthurian legend. I originally wanted to write about what was going on in Britain after the Romans left. But then the more I read about it, the more I became aware that there's very little that's known about this period that's become known as the early Dark Ages. And right slap bang in the middle of the Dark Ages sits the legend of King Arthur. So I was quite keen to try and find historical evidence for the existence of Arthur. And I stumbled across the first full account of Arthur, which is by Geoffrey of Monmouth, writing in the 12th century, who has been accused of making up the Arthur story. But in reality, he pulled it together from scraps of storytelling, legends, the Welsh Chronicles, and some of the tales that have gone into the Mabinogion mention in Arthur.
So, if I could just jump in there, you could have made up a character. Perhaps Arthur is slightly made up, but you chose to pick somebody who already existed in our imaginations. Why was that helpful to you?
Well, essentially, I borrowed the basis for my story from the account of Geoffrey of Monmouth. And he is, in his own head, writing a factual history of the kings of Britain. So he actually presents us with a chronology and a timeline of kings in the post-Roman era. And he comes to Uther Pendragon and Uther's son, Arthur. So by this stage, Geoffrey is drifting into dangerous territory, talking about characters as if they're real historical characters, but about which very little is known, and their very existence is doubted.
But we have to come back, don't we, to the very fact that there has to be an element of truth in all of these things, or something that is believable.
It has to be believable. It doesn't have to be true as such. There just has to be... A good story has characters we can engage with. It has some dramatic tension. It has conflicts. It has resolutions. It has a struggle. And if it has all these things, it's a good story, and it'll be told and retold.
What does it do to us, though,
Well, the point
when
is,
we hear it?
Well, the point is that it needs to be believable, yes, but it needs to be believable if you want it to perpetuate. You know, a story doesn't have to be believable to be enjoyed. You can engage with any story on any level. You know, the hardest science fiction, which may have no basis at all, in fact, can still be enjoyable. But if you want a story to perpetuate, it's got to have that. For example, if you look at urban legends, some of those have gone on for a long time, but they have to have a believable element. Now, there was an urban legend that said that Corona beer, for example, had its distinctive yellow colouring and foam because the Mexicans added another element to the vat when they were making it. Now, this is an urban legend, which is not true, obviously. It was perpetuated, they believe, by the importers of beer who did not handle Corona. But it has enough of an element of truth about it that, you know, press coverage had to say this is not true. And the legend then spread across America.
Does it have to be either frightening, amusing, far-fetched, but still have an element of truth in it? Are there other ingredients that have to be there to make a good... Because yours element is folklore, isn't it?
Yes.
Which are stories passed down from generation to generation.
Yeah. I mean, we have to be able to engage with it, which means that it has to have meaning to us. Folklore is all about meaning. You know, an item, a symbol, a creature like Nessie, in and of itself, doesn't particularly have meaning. Culturally, we ascribe that meaning to it. And therefore, it might mean different things to different people in different parts of the world.
Can I just ask Tim a question? Tim, one of the things you wrote was the legend of Arthur's tantalising and continues to resonate simply because it is unproven. Tell me about that approach to the storytelling, and then I'm going to apply that to Loch Ness and Nessie.
Yes, I mean, I think this is an aspect of legends, is that they most of them come from a storytelling tradition that predates books and written accounts. And I think many legends have a grounding in some factual event or a real person. But these events and people are sort of lost in the dim and distant past. And we can't say definitively that they didn't exist, nor can we say that they definitely existed. And I think this tantalizing aspect of legends is something that keeps us engaged with them.
So my question about Nessie was going to be, and we were hearing from Adrian Shine earlier talking about, look, he hasn't believed for a long time that Nessie existed, if ever. If it were discovered, this is for all of you, that there was at some time a prehistoric monster, they find a fossil on the bottom of Loch Ness, and therefore Nessie did exist but no longer existed, it would be proven, not unproven. Tim, would that destroy the idea of Nessie as a concept?
I think that would just feed into the legend, really. I don't think you can really kill Nessie. Some people will continue believing anyway, even if the scientists come up with absolute definitive proof that there's no large creature in the loch.
Anna, you wanted to say something?
It's very hard to prove a negative. It's very hard to prove that something doesn't exist.
What is the fun of legends, then?
The fun of legends, I think the stories that we tell have to obey certain rules. In order for a story or a legend to perpetuate through centuries, it has to be told and retold and retold. And there are rules about the stories we retell. They have to be entertaining. Nobody's going to listen to a story that isn't entertaining. In order to survive, the story has to have the crucial elements that make it entertaining enough for the person who's listening to remember it and tell it on again. Not necessarily identically.
In the psychology of beliefs, are there definite no-go areas when it comes to legends and myths? They can't be too frightening, for example.
They can be frightening.
Too frightening, I said.
Too frightening, possibly not, because they would... If it was too frightening, it might be retold, but within a much smaller audience. But we tell our children frightening stories, don't we?
We do that.
Our fairy stories can be quite scary.
Perhaps to scare them away from doing things that are dangerous to them.
Possibly, lots of stories.
Don't go swimming in Loch Ness. Well, you wouldn't want to, because there's a monster in there.
Yeah.
There isn't a monster, but don't go swimming in Loch Ness. It's that sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there is an element, isn't there, to storytelling, as you say, that yes, it's to scare people away from things, but also it acts as a moral compass as well, I think, sometimes. So the Victorians were very big on using folklore as a means of a morality tale, you know. So terrible things will happen to you if you are not a fine, upstanding, godly person, for example, or if you dabble in areas that Victorians did not believe were healthy for you. And they would use stories to show what would happen to people who didn't obey those particular sets of rules.
I'll ask you about some of your favourite ones in just a moment. But, Tim, there was a blog, you wrote some answers to somebody who asked you to give your opinion on a blog, and you wrote, I've tried to make Arthur, OK, let's go through them. Likeable, charismatic, somebody with confidence, hope that people will warm to his character, that there are universal themes in this coming-of-age story. You had to make him an all-round good guy. So my question again is, are there no-go areas with myths and legend in which somebody can't be that unpleasant or horrid or dislikable or, you know, just awful?
Well, a lot of these stories persist because they reflect the values of the time. So Arthur is a hero. He's a charismatic figure who pulls together the disparate tribes of Britain and organises defence against the invading Saxons. That's the original 6th century Arthur. But then in the Middle Ages, he morphs into someone wearing shining armour and going on search for the Holy Grail. So he's kind of appropriated by Christianity. So I think, you know, Arthur has changed with retelling of the story and mirrors the values, fears and hopes of different generations.
Mark, you talked about the beer legend, the urban myth, but where would you start if you wanted to make up a really good one?
Well, the prime example of this already exists, actually, and that is Slender Man. So Slender Man is a completely fictional construct. So it was created on the internet, on the Creepypasta website, by somebody who we know the person that created it. And it was created in response to a call to produce a good horror character. But then over time, people began to appreciate that this was a very strong character. So it started to evolve. people believed that it could be found outside of the fictional realm. So people using this kind of legend tripping or expectation sightings.
Legend tripping.
So legend tripping is going out to places that have legends attached to them and spending time in that environment, a bit like a paranormal ghost hunt, for example, that sort of thing. So Slenderman then kind of took on more of a supernatural element. And when we come to the next generation of people coming through, they're no longer certain that this was a fictional construct at all. They think that perhaps it is a supernatural character which has a basis in truth. So then people start to report sightings, and then the myth begins to snowball from there. And
So just very quickly, because this is not too long a time.
Yeah.
This started how long ago?
Well, this is in the last 10 to 15 years. It's
Okay,
not-
and
not a-
it's
not an
still
old
around,
story.
but
Yes,
he has
absolutely.
mutated, he has been revised. These are the things that we've had to learn about,
Yes.
myths and legends. They have to fit with the time. If something difficult is discovered about this person, then you have to sort of say, oh, well, in fact, that's changed. You don't destroy the legend because something unfavourable has been found out.
But we're very, very good at doing that. When we retell a story, it's exactly what we do. We smooth over the difficult bits. We change the characters into people we understand better. We change the action into something that makes more sense to us. Stories always mutate in the
But
telling.
you
And
love them, don't you?
of course we love stories. We are the animal that tells stories. We are the social animal, and telling stories is what we do, and we love it.
Particular favourite?
Favourite, I love
Legends.
all legends. King Arthur is a favourite, but more for the romantic triangle, really. It's Queen Guinevere and Sir Lancelot. That's what everybody knows about King Arthur. And I think
Tim,
that's
do you
the-
write about them as well?
No, my Arthur is the 6th century, down in the dirt, rough warlord. Guinevere and Lancelot and Camelot and the knights in shining armour don't come in until the Middle Ages. So I'm not really interested in that telling of the Arthur story.
OK, so if you had to add one element, following what you've heard from these two experts here and others that you've spoken to, that would perhaps add a little bit of spice, a little bit extra to your book, and I think the latest one's called Dux Bellorum. If you had to add something to that, what would it be? What would the extra ingredient be now?
Well, I mean, the ingredient I've sort of added is the quote from Nennius, and this is supposed to link Arthur to as being a real historical character. So it's a monk called Nennius writing in the 9th century who refers to Arthur as Dux Bellorum, meaning a leader of battles, and he organises the Britons to fight against the Saxons. So this is supposed to be a real historical fixing point around which the legend is built. So I've been concerned to try and show my Arthur as a believable, real 6th century character as far as is possible.
Well, let us ask Mark. We don't have very much time left, but let us ask Mark, when you are editing the Folklore podcast, what are the things that you will not touch with a barge pole, and what are the things that you think make people attracted to this idea of stories that we know aren't true?
Well, the simple answer to that is because my podcast is designed to appeal to all ages. The only things that I won't touch are people that would are subjects that would offend people of a younger age, for example. I don't believe that it's my place to edit anybody's beliefs or anybody's legends. It's my place to present those stories to the wider community, to other cultures, to listen to hopefully understand a bit more by the time we've spoken about them, and to see how they resonate with their own beliefs.
Any harm come from any of these ideas, Anna? What would you say?
I very much doubt it, but it depends whether people are going to act on their ideas. If you believe in the legend of King Arthur or the Loch Ness Monster, are you going to do anything as a result of that? You might have a holiday at Loch Ness, and I'm sure you'll have a very pleasant time. It's one of my favourite destinations in Scotland.
You were there just a couple of months.
I was. Every time I go there, it rains, but I love it anyway. It's not doing me any harm whether I believe or not.
Well, can we ask you? Do
I
you believe in Nessie? We'll finish where we started.
No. Personally, I don't, but I can well understand that people do. There's a saying that seeing is believing, but psychologists are more likely to say that believing is seeing. People see things when it's dark, it's raining, it's misty, you can't see very well. They'll see something that looks a bit odd, and that will become what they're expecting to see. If they believe in the Loch Ness Monster, they can see the Loch Ness Monster. People who don't believe in it won't see it. They'll see a log floating on the surface, but what they see won't be the Loch Ness Monster.
Until it rears up and comes
Well,
out
yeah,
of the water
yeah.
and eats a small child. Listen, I don't want to scare anybody, but there we have to end it. Tim, thank you very much indeed. Dux Bellorum, latest book about King Arthur, various iterations of King Arthur. Thank you for coming on to talk about myths and legends. Anna Stone, thank you very much indeed. Mark Norman also. And when we were talking, of course, about Nessie with Adrian Shine at the beginning of the programme, he mentioned some monsters that can be seen as bad monsters and others that can be seen as good ones. And, of course, it brought to my mind the idea of serendipity, the prehistoric monster who swims around, I think it's Sri Lanka, or that area anyway, and it's now become an idea of good things are going to happen just because good things happened. It is serendipitous. Thank you, serendipitous, to have had you all on the programme. From me, David Foster, from the Roundtable team, goodbye for now. Hope to have your company next time.